So this is a very interesting period in the history of the social and political evolution of Chamba as a princely state, as well as the evolution of the various art forms which were present in Chamba from the days of yore towards the beginning of the 20th century. So this is a period when the region is going through several political turmoils. The Mughals have made themselves the supreme sovereignty in the northern states, and a lot of Pahari chieftains have come under direct Mughal control, beginning from the reign of Akbar and continuing till the reign of Muhammad Shah, prior to the invasion of Nadir Shah in 1739. And then the Abdalis emerge as the potent political power, then the Pahari chieftains turn their subjugations toward the Afghans, and then later the Sikhs. And before we delve deep into the kind of visual arts that I shall be discussing today, it is significant to understand the geographical location of Chamba and other major political powers in its near proximity. If you are able to see this slide, you shall be viewing the location of Chamba, nestled by snowy hills on its 8 sides. And it is bordered on the west by Basohli, on the southwest by Nurpur, on the south by Kangra, on the southeast by Kullu, and then there is Lahul, with which Chamba doesn't share a lot of social, cultural, or political interaction. But the other states have had a significant impact on the development of the various art forms which were in vogue in Chamba back in the day. So these are the kings who have tremendously contributed towards the development of Chamba School of Painting, Chamba Architecture, wood carving, and other art forms which were running simultaneously. The story begins with the reign of Raja Prithvi Singh, who ruled from 1641 to 1664. He was installed on the throne of Chamba by Shah Jahan, and Prithvi Singh was succeeded by Raja Chhatar Singh, who reigned from 1664 to 1690. Chamba witnessed an era of political supremacy during his reign, and the expansion of the royal of the territories of the state were towards Kishtwar in the north and present-day Palampur in the south. He was succeeded by Raja Uday Singh, who remains a very controversial figure in the political history of Chamba, as he was assassinated by his own court. And Uday Singh was succeeded by Ugar Singh, who was likewise deposed and later murdered by the people of Chamba. Ugar Singh was succeeded by Dalal Singh, and he also had to cut his reign short following political turmoil in Chamba at that time. And then he was succeeded by Umaid Singh, who laid the foundations of the very famous Devi Kothi temple at Chura. All of these had continuously provided impetus to the art of painting, even though there were certain political upheaval which all of these reigns have faced over the course of time. And the regional material culture, which these kings laid the foundation of, which flourished towards the mid-18th century, include painting, sculpture, wood carving, murals, toranas, and fountain stone slabs. So I was thinking of how to conduct and carry forward this presentation, was whether to provide brief introductions to every single art form, but then I did not think, I decided not to take that path for myself, and rather I decided to focus on the syncretic nature of the various art forms which were running parallel to each other. For example, the influence of painting tradition on the sculpture, on the sculpture, and the influence of wood carvings on sculpture, and then how it has paved its way towards painting. And this influence has also brought its manifestation on the social and political aspect of the state as well, which we shall be discussing in the end. So in order to make my point, I shall be taking the case of the wood carved doorways of the Bharmor Kothi, which was the administrative office of Chamba, laid by Raja Prithvi Singh in the year around 1641, when he came to hold the power of Chamba back in his own hands. And here we see On the left lies the doorway of the Koti of Bharmor, even though now the door has been carved and placed in the Puri Singh Museum at Chamba. So on the left, we see Raja Prithvi Singh, a young prince here, holding Mahi Maratib, which is the Mughal fish standard, and opposed to him stands a Mughal prince identified by some as Darashiko, identified by some as Shah Jahan, but he doesn't seem to be Shah Jahan, rather appears to be of a young age, and he might just be Darashiko, given the age difference that these two had, which is less than 3 years. And then the two gentlemen are supported by Rajput warriors who stand in the bottom register. So this doorway is very much similar to the portrait of Raja Prithvi Singh that we find standing next to Shah Jahan. So Prithvi Singh is offering the elder Mughal emperor a falcon, which the state of Chamba was very much popular for in the 17th century. And here is a small miniature turban, a crown that that belongs to the falcon. And Shah Jahan appears to be fondly rubbing his hand against the falcon's feathers. And on comparing his portraits to several of the portraits that we find belonging to this period, we are able to assume that the painting might have been made in the early 1650s, even though this is just a tentative date that I have suggested down there, because none of these paintings are either dated or signed by the painters. On top, we have Takri inscriptions, which read Shah Jahan, and the other inscription reads Darshana. So what it means is the viewing of Shah Jahan. So Prithvi Singh, who visited the Mughal court 9 times in his life, quite a feat for a Pahadi chieftain to this very day. So this might have been recorded on one of his visits, and it appears that the likeness of Shah Jahan is based on an earlier portrait, perhaps made by some other Mughal painter, and he might have been holding either a gem or a flower bud in his hand, which has been omitted in this portrait, and Prithvi Singh's likeness must have been recorded naturalistically. So the reason behind having these kind of likenesses recorded with the Mughal emperors might have its roots in the political situation of the region at that time. So the entire northern western Himalayas at this period were going through the period of political turmoil, and Chamba at this time, prior to this time, belonged to Nurpur, a state which ruled over Chamba for more than 22 years. And Prithvi Singh was the one who was able to reclaim Chamba territory back into the Varmana dynasty's stronghold. And Shah Jahan played a pivotal role in achieving so. And this might have been the reason that the Rajas of Chamba started celebrating their supplication to the Mughals, and this doorway and the paintings of this sort were made in order to commemorate the friendship or the political alliance that the Raja of Chamba shared with the Mughal emperor. And this is one of the earliest instances. This is among the earliest instances that we find of the syncretism between the painting tradition and the wood carving tradition at Chamba. Now we move to another example. So if you are able to see the slide, on the left right here, we have a detail from the wood carvings on the ceiling of the Chamunda temple at Chamba. And this wood carving must have been laid in the year 1690 during the reign of Raja Chhatar Singh, the successor of Raja Prithvi Singh. And here we see Brahma depicted within an 8-pointed star frame. So this 8-pointed star frame is very peculiar because it appears to be inspired from the Islamic 8-pointed star, also known as Najmat al-Quds. And here we see, here I have an example from West Asia. And you might be able to make out the similarity between these two. And nowhere in Chamba prior to this period have we found traces of being an involvement of Islamic civilization in the region. And I do believe that this kind of visual language must have been brought along with themselves by the Mughal painters who must have spent some time in Chamba. Even though we don't find any details of which painter families must have migrated to Chamba from the Mughal workshop, particularly from Lahore, but the possibility of Muslim painters working at Chamba at that period cannot be denied, even though we don't find any accounts, names of these painters anywhere. So here's a second example. Another detail from the same temple premise. Here we do have what appears to be an angel head with feathers emerging out of it, also known as the cherub head, which also has its origins in the Persian miniature painting tradition. And this iconography paved its way into the mainstream art activity at Chamba via the Mughal channel. And this is also from the same temple premise, and perhaps designed by the same set of painters who were working on the wood carvings of the ceilings of the Chamunda temple. It is also very much important to note here that all of these painters were known by the title of Tarkhan Chitere, which means painter carpenter. So other than making paintings, they were also indulged in the art of wood carving. So this is one of the most prominent examples that we have to show right here. So the temple of Lakshmi Narayana was made in the 11th century, as the historical record suggests to us. But this silver torna behind the chief sculpture statue was installed in the year 1747, as revealed to us by an inscription on the torna itself. And it is said that the commission was made by Raja Dalal Singh of Chamba in the year 1747, and the two craftsmen who were indulged with the designing and manufacture of this torna were Lehru and Mahesh, identified as Chiteres, which means Lehru and Mahesh were two painters who have designed the torna. So the left and the right pillars of the torna include the Dasavatara iconography, which are the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. And on the top arch right here, we have the depictions of several gods and demigods. So on the right here is the line study of Torna. If we compare the Torna to this painted doorway that we have on the right, which has been taken from the Rang Mahal, or the Queen's Chamber, we are able to see that a very similar design has been followed in these two traditions. So which further suggests to us the involvement of painters with the designing of the Lakshmi Narayana Torna, as the installation of panels on the either sides depicting various deities and other figures within these decorated Mughal cartouche is very much similar to how the designing has been done on the Lakshmi Narayana Torna on the left. But let us focus on the iconography of these 10 incarnations of Vishnu for a moment and compare them to paintings. For example, so on the top portion of the Torna pillars, we do find the depiction of the Buddha Avatara. If you're able to see this line drawing depiction on top, so you shall be able to point out that the Buddha in the Torna is depicted with cusped hands at front, and he sits on a lotus petal. I'm sorry, kept on a pedestal and flanked on devotees on either side. So this is dated 1747. Let's look at a painting which was made perhaps in the year 1730 at the Chandigarh Museum right now, and we shall be able to point out the similarity which is here between the two. So here is Buddha seated with cusped hands, even though two hands were added by the artist in order to suggest a Vishnu connection. And then he also sits on a lotus petal, which is put on a pedestal, and then he is flanked by devotees on either sides. And a third example, which is of a later date, is also very much similar to the depiction of Buddha on the Lakshmi Narayana Torana. And here we see Buddha seated with cusped hands, with his uttariyas flowing. And then again, he's also flanked by deities on the other side. So if this is supposed to be considered a coincidence, let us look at another example right here, which is the 8th incarnation, Balarama. So in the Lakshmi Narayana Torna, we are able to see that Balarama, with his club in one hand and the plough in the other, he is changing the course of the river Yamuna. He's slightly with a slightly bent physique, he looks back at the river changing its course, and then he's flanked by the river Yamuna on one side, and then Krishna supports him on the right hand side. And let us compare this composition to the painting which was made in the year 1700. And we are able to make out a direct connection between these two. Even this painting, which was made in the year 1740, also has a very strongly visible iconographic elements compared to the Torana image. And then there is a later painting bearing very strong Guler painting influence, but very much similar in its iconographic approach. But this is among the most significant of all the Dashavatara depictions that we find from Chamba. Here is Parshurama slaying Sahasrabahu. Sahasrabahu was a mythical king who asked Parshurama's father Jamdagni for the Kamadhenu, wish-fulfilling cow, and then he attacked Jamdagni, and then Jamdagni's corpse fell on a side which was supported by Parshurama's mother, and then Parshurama chopped off the multiple arms of Sahasrabahu. So all of these paintings, starting from the year 1660 towards 1770, we see a very staunch and a very rigid iconographic system being followed. So Parshurama, he raises his axe in the air, holds Sahasrabahu by his hair, and then the Kamadhenu cow is visible flying towards the side in the background. Jamdagni's lifeless body is on the ground, which is then supported by Parshurama's mother. And this formula is followed throughout the history of the visual history of Chamba painting, and then further paved its way towards sculpture and metal casting tradition as well. And equally interesting is the depiction of the Vamana Avatara. And here, the Vamana iconography in Chamba painting is Vamana asking for a sacrifice from Raja Bali. And Shukracharya, the demon guru, is always shown suggesting Bali to take precaution in order to, while dealing with Vamana, because he doesn't trust Vamana that much. And in almost all of these paintings, Shukracharya is pointing towards his face, as we can see right here and right here as well, in a manner very much similar to his depiction in the Torana of the Lakshmi Narayana temple. But compared to other depictions of Vishnu's incarnations in the Torana of Lakshmi Narayana, here it is Raja Bali who is depicted in the center portion, and not Vamana himself. I believe this might have been done. In order to put Shukracharya behind Raja Bali in order to stay loyal towards the painting iconography. And when it comes to the decorative motifs in the Torana of the Lakshmi Narayana temple, we are able to see here that there is a double lotus petal design that we are able to see. And even the roots of this double petal design lies in the sculpture tradition of the region. So here is the hero stone, or the commemorative stone of Raja Uday Singh of Chamba, who was murdered by his courtiers. And here he is depicted by along with his 22 wives. And the lotus petal design on his hero stone and the lotus petal design on the hero stone of Raja Ugar Singh, both are very much similar to the ones that we are able to see in the arch of the Lakshmi Narayana Torana. So other than painting, now the influence of wood carving is also being felt in the tradition of metal casting of Chamba belonging to this period. And this same double lotus pattern we are able to see in several Chamba paintings as well. So here is a detail from a Ragamala painting. Here we are able to see that the pattern is employed in order to decorate the ceilings and roofs. Here is another Ragamala painting right here. All of these paintings, they belong to different time periods. The same pattern has paved its way in the decorative ceiling in the back right here. And here we have another painting, details from a Nrsimha Avatara painting belonging to this period. Interestingly, the root origins of this decorative design lies in the sculpture tradition of Chamba. Here is a stone relief taken from a detail belonging to the 11th century. And here we are able to see that the same decorative motif has spanned over around roughly 800 years, having the same patterns being depicted time and again. And here is another example that we have right here. So as we are able to see in the hero stone on the left, the space is divided into two registers. So here is the doorway towards the entrance into the scene. So the lower register serves as the outer walls of the premise. And here is a door, open door, right for us to enter. And these figures, the Raja Ugar Singh and his four wives, they are seated inside the inner chamber of this stone structure. And the same effect is again copied, reproduced by the artist, who has translated the same way of dividing the space into the pictorial format. And here we have Krishna stealing butter with other gopas, a painting attributed to Nehru. And the artist has taken the same approach, with the lower register dedicated to the outer wall, and the doorway is installed in the outer wall itself. And when the viewer enters into the composition through the lower register, then he is able to make out the details of the inner register, which also includes the final details of the paintings. So all of these details, when we compare the visual language of the paintings with the visual language of the sculpture and the wood carvings, what we are able to make out is that the painters, Pahari painters who were working at Chamba, were not restricted only to the art of painting, but they also ventured into other mediums as well. They were taking inspirations from the iconography of the sculpture tradition of the region, and they were also having interactions with the wood carvers who were active in Chamba at the same time. And this led to a syncretic iconographic language, which was being followed in the region, irrespective of the various styles, as we are able to see. Many, more than one painter families were active at Chamba, and there is not a single Chamba painting style per se, but iconographically, all these paintings, they are linked together. Second thing which we are able to make out from this transition is its influence on the society of Chamba of that period. There are two major painter families active at Chamba, descendants of which are still active in the region, and both of those families have claims that originally they were Brahmins, but now they come under the Dhiman category, which is the artisan community. And I believe the reason behind that shift in the caste might have been because of the profession that they chose, especially painters who might have worked with animal glue to bind the papers together. This led to the shift of their status in the social structure of that period. And the third, lastly, is the political influence of these art forms on the society, that, as we are able to see. So the lines between Hindus and Muslims at that period were not as staunch or distinct as they are today. And the Rajas of Chamba had no problem with employing Muslim iconography in Hindu temples, as there were no identities which could distinguish people from one person from the other on religious lines, and art was relatively secular at that period. So this was a very brief presentation on the visual iconography of Chamba miniature painting and its relationship with other art forms of the region. I hope I had shed some important light on the matter. And with this, I shall end my presentation. Thank you very much.